The company parking lot was alive with noise and movement as the sun dipped behind the tall glass towers that surrounded the headquarters. Dozens of employees hurried to their cars, their footsteps echoing against the concrete floor, some talking on phones, others joking with colleagues, and many too tired to do anything but walk in silence toward the exit. It was the end of a long workday, and everyone wanted to get home quickly. Among the crowd, however, all eyes naturally shifted when the CEO appeared. He was a tall man in his early 50s, dressed in a sharp navy suit that still looked crisp despite the long day, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. He was known for his power, his wealth, and his intimidating presence. People often lowered their voices when he passed, not out of fear but out of respect, though sometimes it felt the two were the same. The CEO moved with the kind of confidence that comes only from years of success, his shoulders straight, his face calm, and his eyes fixed on his destination, a sleek black luxury car that waited for him near the far corner of the lot. The vehicle itself seemed like a symbol of his authority, spotless, shining under the soft glow of the overhead lamps, its tinted windows reflecting the busy crowd around it. For him, getting into that car was routine, as ordinary as breathing. But that evening was about to be anything but ordinary. At that moment, while many workers kept their heads down, a man in a faded blue uniform pushed a cart filled with cleaning supplies along the edge of the lot. He was the janitor, someone few paid attention to. His job was thankless, invisible work, sweeping floors, wiping windows, collecting trash from desks. Most employees barely noticed when he was around. He was middle-aged, quiet, his hands rough from years of labor, his eyes carrying a weariness that came from long nights. Yet tonight those eyes caught something that others missed. As he pushed his cart past the CEO's car, something in his chest tightened. His heart raced, though he could not yet explain why. He slowed, studying the vehicle, and then suddenly, without thinking, he raised his voice louder than he ever had before in that place. His cry cut through the noise of chatter, footsteps, and car engines. "Don't get in the car," he shouted, his voice cracking but urgent, echoing across the lot with such force that everyone froze. For a moment, the entire parking lot seemed to hold its breath. A hush fell, and every head turned toward the janitor. People blinked in confusion, unsure they had heard correctly. Some frowned, wondering if he had lost his mind. Others chuckled nervously, already imagining the anger that would soon flash across the CEO's face. No one ever raised their voice at him. No one dared to give him orders. And yet here was the janitor, a man many ignored daily, shouting a command that struck with the weight of an alarm. The CEO himself stopped mid-step, his hand hovering above the car door handle. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened, and his cheeks flushed with sudden heat. Embarrassment flooded through him. The most powerful man in the company, about to be told what to do by a janitor in a stained uniform. It felt absurd. It felt humiliating. And yet, beneath his pride, there was something else, something he could not ignore. The janitor's tone was not careless. It carried a trembling urgency that suggested fear, not madness. The silence stretched. Employees exchanged looks, some whispering under their breath. "What is he doing?" someone muttered. Another laughed, "He's going to get fired for that." The CEO's fingers brushed the car handle again, his instinct pushing him to open it, to prove his authority, to show that he was in control. But as his hand lingered there, his eyes flicked back to the janitor. He saw the man's chest heaving, his lips pressed tight as though holding back more words, and his hands shaking slightly as he pointed at the car. This was not a stunt. This was not disrespect. It was something else. The janitor looked almost desperate. That sight, more than the words themselves, made the CEO hesitate. Seconds passed like minutes. The employees now leaned in, waiting for the explosion they thought would come, waiting for the CEO to shout back, to dismiss the janitor with a single wave of his hand. But instead, the CEO stayed frozen, caught between two instincts, pride and caution. His pride told him this was nonsense, that nothing could be wrong, that no janitor could possibly know something he did not. But caution whispered that ignoring such a strange, bold warning might be reckless. What if, against all logic, the man had seen something? The CEO's mind wrestled with itself as the parking lot seemed to grow darker and quieter, the weight of suspense pressing on everyone. The janitor did not move his eyes from the CEO. His voice, softer now but still firm, carried again, "Please, sir, don't open that door." The plea carried a rawness, a sincerity that broke through the invisible wall between their two worlds, the man of power and the man of labor. Around them, dozens of employees stared, their faces a mix of amusement, concern, and disbelief. A few even pulled out phones, sensing this was a moment worth recording, though they did not yet understand why. The CEO's hand fell away from the car door at last. His face betrayed nothing, but inside, his thoughts swirled. He turned slowly to face the janitor, his eyes sharp and commanding. The crowd waited for the storm, but instead they saw only silence. That silence was louder than any shout, stretching into the night air, leaving the question hanging heavy over the lot. Had the janitor just made a fool of himself, or had he seen something no one else dared to notice? The air in the parking lot was so heavy that even the faint hum of the overhead lamps seemed louder than usual, pressing into the silence that had followed the janitor's cry. The CEO's hand had dropped from the car door, but his face showed little of what he was thinking. To the employees watching, the scene felt unreal. Some were convinced the janitor had simply lost his mind, and others thought maybe he was drunk or joking. Yet a few noticed something in his trembling voice, a seriousness that was hard to dismiss. The janitor himself stood stiff, his heart racing as if he had just crossed a dangerous line. He knew what this meant, shouting at the CEO, in public, in front of the whole company. His job could vanish before the sun rose again. But the fear that had driven him to shout was stronger than the fear of losing his livelihood. He had seen something earlier, something that gnawed at his gut, and now he could not stay silent. The CEO finally spoke, his voice low but sharp, slicing through the tension. "What did you just say?" His eyes locked onto the janitor, who swallowed hard but did not look away. "I said, don't get in that car," the janitor repeated, softer this time, but still firm. Murmurs spread through the crowd. People nudged each other, whispering, "He's finished. Nobody talks to the boss like that." But the CEO, instead of exploding, tilted his head slightly, as if studying the janitor, trying to decide if this was foolishness or something more. The janitor raised his hand, pointing toward the sleek black car. "I was cleaning here earlier," he said, his words rushed, almost stumbling, but every syllable carried urgency. "I saw someone near your car, someone who didn't belong here. I thought maybe it was just my imagination, but then I noticed scratches on the lock. Fresh ones. Like somebody tried to force it open." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some employees stepped back instinctively, others leaned closer. The CEO's face stiffened, though he tried to hide his reaction. He hated being made vulnerable in front of his workers, hated the idea that fear could touch him. Yet as his eyes drifted toward the car, a flicker of doubt crept in. Scratches on the lock. Tampering? Could it be true? He slowly turned back toward the janitor, who stood clutching the handle of his cart like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "You're saying someone tried to break into my car?" the CEO asked, his voice calm but edged with suspicion. The janitor nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I didn't think much of it at first, but the more I looked, the more wrong it felt. Something isn't right." His eyes darted nervously toward the car again, as though expecting it to suddenly reveal its secret. Some of the onlookers rolled their eyes. One whispered, "This is ridiculous. It's just a car. Probably kids messing around." Another chuckled, "Wait till the boss fires him for this stunt." But not everyone laughed. A few of the security staff shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances, because they knew the janitor had a reputation for being quiet, hardworking, and never stirring trouble. He wasn't the type to shout for attention. That fact alone made his words harder to dismiss. The CEO stood still, his mind racing. He wanted to brush it off, to climb into the car and prove the janitor wrong, but he felt a cold prickling at the back of his neck. What if, by chance, the man was telling the truth? What if something dangerous was waiting inside? His pride told him this was beneath him, that he could not allow a janitor to dictate his actions, not in front of so many eyes. But his instinct whispered that caution might save him. Finally, the CEO turned to his head of security, who was standing a few steps behind. "Check it," he ordered simply. The guard nodded and moved toward the car, his flashlight in hand. All eyes followed, the crowd now buzzing with hushed excitement. The guard leaned in, scanning the handle, the lock, the window. He paused, bending lower, and then raised his head with a frown. "Sir, there are scratches. Deep ones. Looks fresh." The whispers grew louder. Some people covered their mouths in shock. Others stared at the janitor with new respect, realizing he might not be crazy after all. The CEO's jaw tightened, but he did not speak. The guard continued, opening the passenger door carefully and shining his light inside. At first, nothing seemed unusual, just the leather seats and spotless interior. But then, as he bent closer, the beam caught something under the driver's seat, something small, black, and metallic. The guard froze. He pulled back slightly, his breathing shallow. "Sir," he called, his voice uneasy, there's something under here." A device. The word device sent a chill through the lot. People gasped, some stepping backward, others leaning forward in morbid curiosity. "What do you mean, a device?" the CEO demanded, his voice louder now, betraying the first hint of fear. The guard swallowed hard. "It looks like a tracker. Or maybe worse." He didn't dare say the word bomb, but it hung heavy in the air, unspoken yet felt by all. Panic rippled through the employees. Some clutched their bags tighter, others inched away from the car, their eyes wide with dread. The janitor stood frozen, his heart thudding. He had been right. He didn't want to be right, but he was. And now the danger was no longer a suspicion. It was real, sitting there, inches away from the CEO's seat. The CEO himself felt his legs weaken slightly, though he forced his face to remain stone. He glanced at the janitor once more, and for the first time, there was no anger, no embarrassment, only shock. The suspense spread like fire. Who would dare place such a thing in the CEO's car? Was it random vandalism, or something much darker, something personal? The parking lot no longer felt like a safe place. Everyone could sense it now, something hidden, something dangerous had been waiting in the shadows, and it was the janitor's cry that had stopped the CEO from walking straight into it. The discovery of the strange black device under the seat changed the atmosphere of the entire parking lot in an instant, turning what had felt like a simple end to a long workday into something out of a nightmare. People who had moments earlier been laughing, joking, or unlocking their cars now stood frozen, their bodies stiff, their eyes glued to the security guard who crouched beside the CEO's car, his flashlight beam trembling slightly as it hovered over the object. He didn't dare touch it, not yet, because even without being an expert he could tell this was no ordinary piece of technology, and whatever it was, it did not belong there. The crowd whispered nervously, their voices overlapping in a low hum like the sound of distant bees, but every so often someone's words rang clear. Could it be a bomb? Who would do this? Why the CEO? The CEO himself stood only a few feet away, his face pale beneath the parking lot lights. He had faced fierce boardroom battles, hostile takeovers, lawsuits, and scandals, but never before had he stood this close to the possibility of physical danger, the kind that could have ended his life in an instant. The thought made his stomach twist, though he fought hard to keep any trace of fear off his face, knowing that dozens of employees were watching, waiting to see his reaction. The janitor, still clutching his cart, felt a shiver run down his spine. He had not expected this. He had only shouted because his instincts screamed that something was wrong, but now, seeing the reality of it, he almost wished he had been mistaken. His heart thumped painfully against his ribs, his throat dry, and yet he felt a strange mix of relief too, relief that the CEO had not stepped inside, relief that his warning had been heard. The security guard stepped back carefully, keeping his flashlight on the device. "We should clear the area," he said, his voice unsteady but firm. "No one should be near this car until we know what it is." That order sent ripples of unease through the crowd. People began backing away, some clutching their belongings tightly, others murmuring prayers under their breath. Even those who had mocked the janitor a moment ago now glanced at him with wide eyes, realizing that his desperate cry had perhaps saved not just the CEO but many others who could have been caught in an explosion. The CEO's eyes darted toward his staff, then back to the car. He despised the idea of showing weakness, but the weight of responsibility bore down on him. Slowly, he nodded. "Call the police." "Call the bomb squad if you have to," he ordered sharply. Phones were pulled out immediately, calls made, voices trembling as they explained the situation. Within minutes, sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder as they approached, a chilling reminder that this was no drill, no false alarm. The CEO stood tall, but inside his thoughts spun wildly. Who could have done this? A rival company? Someone inside his own building? He had always known that power came with enemies, but he had imagined battles fought with money, lawyers, and influence, not wires, circuits, and explosives. When the police cars pulled into the lot, their flashing red and blue lights cast eerie patterns across the glass towers and concrete floor. Officers jumped out quickly, shouting orders to move everyone further back. Fear spread like smoke. Employees huddled together, whispering in disbelief, some already texting family members to share what was happening. The janitor stood apart, his head low, unsure if he should stay or slip away. But a firm hand suddenly touched his shoulder. It was one of the security staff, his expression serious. "Stay," he said quietly. "The boss might want to hear more from you." The janitor nodded, though his throat tightened. He had spent years trying to remain invisible, unnoticed, blending into the background with his mop and cart. Now he was the center of a storm he had never asked for. The bomb squad arrived next, dressed in heavy protective suits, their movements calm and precise. They surrounded the car, examining every inch before focusing on the object under the driver's seat. Time seemed to slow as everyone watched, their breaths held, waiting for the verdict. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, one of the bomb squad members lifted his visor and called out. "It's not a bomb. It's a tracker. A high-tech one." Relief and confusion surged through the crowd all at once. Some people laughed nervously, others sighed heavily, but the unease didn't vanish. A tracker meant someone had been following the CEO, studying his movements, planning something. It wasn't an attack today, but it could easily become one tomorrow. The CEO's fists clenched tightly at his sides, anger bubbling beneath his calm surface. Someone had gotten close enough to his car to plant a device, close enough to nearly endanger him in front of his entire company. His pride burned, his suspicion sharp. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd of employees as though trying to spot guilt in their faces. No one dared to meet his eyes. And then, unexpectedly, his gaze landed on the janitor again. For the first time, he didn't see a cleaner, someone forgettable in a uniform. He saw the man who had noticed what no one else had, who had spoken up when silence would have been safer. The janitor looked back, uncertain, nervous, but unwavering. The unspoken question lingered between them: why had he been the one to see it, when so many others had walked by without noticing? As the police secured the device and prepared to take it for investigation, the CEO's voice rang out once more, steady but cold. "No one leaves until we find out how this happened." His words sent a shiver through the crowd. What had started as a simple warning was now unraveling into a mystery that touched everyone present. The janitor, standing quietly, felt a deep chill settle into his bones. The danger wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. The police kept the crowd at a distance while the bomb squad carefully removed the sleek black device from under the CEO's car seat, sealing it in a metal case as though it were a deadly artifact. The parking lot that had once been filled with the sounds of footsteps, laughter, and the hum of engines was now silent except for the voices of officers giving sharp commands. Employees stood behind yellow tape, their faces pale, their eyes wide, many of them still in disbelief that such a thing could happen in the heart of their workplace. The CEO stood slightly apart, his arms crossed tightly, his jaw clenched. He had built his career on control of numbers, of people, of entire markets, but tonight, for the first time in years, he felt that control slipping. Someone had planted a tracker in his car. Someone had been watching him, studying his movements, waiting. The thought made his stomach twist with anger and unease. He was a man used to fighting battles with contracts and negotiations, but this was different, this was personal, and it made his blood run cold. The janitor stood quietly a few feet away, still gripping his cleaning cart as though afraid to let it go. He watched the flashing red and blue lights reflect across the sleek glass walls of the building and wondered how he had ended up in the center of all this. Only an hour ago he had been invisible, just another man sweeping the floor while others rushed past him. Now, dozens of eyes glanced toward him every few minutes, some filled with respect, others with suspicion, and he wished he could disappear again. But deep down he knew there was no going back. The warning he had shouted had changed everything. A police officer approached the CEO with a grim expression, holding a small clear bag that contained something pulled from the car's lock. Inside were thin metallic shavings, signs of tampering. "This wasn't just a tracker, sir," the officer said quietly, though loud enough for others to hear. "Someone broke into your car, someone skilled. They wanted this inside, and they wanted you not to notice." The CEO's lips pressed into a hard line. His eyes narrowed as the reality sank deeper. This was not random. This was planned. Whispers spread quickly among the employees. "Who could it be?" one asked, her voice trembling. "What if it's someone from inside?" another replied, and the suggestion hung in the air like smoke. The CEO heard the whispers, and though he did not comment, the thought had already entered his mind. Outsiders could not have planted the device so easily, not in the secured lot with cameras and guards. That meant the enemy could be within the very walls of his company, walking the same hallways, wearing the same badges, smiling to his face while hiding betrayal. The idea made his pulse race, not out of fear, but out of fury. He would not allow such treachery to go unanswered. He turned sharply to his head of security. "Pull the footage from every camera," he ordered. "I want to know who was near this car today, this week, this month. I want names. No one leaves until I say so." The guard nodded quickly, rushing toward the building to carry out the order. Meanwhile, the janitor felt every eye heavy on him. A few employees whispered that maybe he knew too much, maybe he had been involved. Others shook their heads, saying no, it was his warning that had saved the CEO. But the shadow of suspicion was there, thin but sharp, and the janitor could feel it press against his skin like a blade. The CEO noticed it too. He studied the janitor for a long moment, his eyes piercing. "How did you see it when no one else did?" he asked finally, his voice carrying across the lot. The janitor swallowed hard, his throat dry, but he forced himself to answer. I notice small things," he said softly. "It's my job to clean. I see the scratches others don't. I see what's out of place. That's all." But the way he said it, with a calm firmness, made a few people in the crowd shiver. There was more to this man than sweeping floors. Minutes later, the head of security returned, his face pale as he held a tablet with footage queued up. The crowd pressed closer despite police warnings to keep back. On the screen, grainy black and white video showed the parking lot earlier that afternoon. At first nothing seemed unusual, just employees coming and going, cars pulling in and out. But then the image shifted to the CEO's car. A figure appeared beside it, hood pulled low, moving with quick precision. The figure knelt, worked on the lock, slipped something inside. The footage wasn't clear enough to show the face, but what shocked everyone was that the person moved with confidence, as if they knew the cameras were there, as if they didn't care. The guard froze the frame, zooming in on the badge clipped to the figure's belt. It was faint, but visible, a company ID badge. Gasps spread through the lot like wildfire. It wasn't an outsider. It was someone from inside the company. The CEO's eyes turned to steel. He stepped closer to the screen, studying the blurred outline, the faint badge, the confident stance. He could not yet see the face, but he could feel the betrayal, heavy and suffocating. His employees murmured anxiously, some whispering names, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The janitor, still standing silently, felt the weight of the revelation settle deep in his chest. He had been right to speak, but what they had found was even worse than he imagined. It wasn't just danger, it was betrayal. Someone trusted, someone close, had planted the device, and that truth would shatter the company from within. The CEO's voice cut through the murmurs, colder than ever. "Find them," he said. "I don't care what it takes. Find them." And with that, the suspense deepened, the mystery growing darker. The device was no longer just a threat. It was a message, and the sender was one of their own. The next morning the company was restless. Whispers followed the janitor through the halls. Some looked at him with respect, others with doubt. But everyone knew one thing: the man who once was invisible had now become the center of attention. The CEO, Mr. Callahan, walked through the building with his usual confidence, but there was a strange tightness in his face. He had barely slept. The words kept echoing in his head, "Don't get in the car." Those words had saved him, but they also shook him in a way he could not admit. He was used to controlling everything, yet last night had proven that he was not in control at all. He called for the janitor, whose name was Robert, into his office. Robert stepped in carefully, his mop still wet, his shoes leaving faint marks on the polished floor. "Sit down," the CEO said. Robert hesitated but obeyed. For a long moment there was silence. The ticking of the clock on the wall felt louder than usual. "Tell me exactly what you saw," Mr. Callahan demanded. Robert swallowed. "Sir, I saw a shadow under your car. I saw wires. And I know what wires like that mean." The CEO frowned. "How do you know?" Robert's voice was quiet, but steady. "Because I've seen it before. A long time ago." The room felt colder. Robert's eyes shifted, as if remembering something painful. The CEO leaned forward. "Explain." Robert stared at the floor for a moment, then back up. "Before I was a janitor, I was in the military. I worked in logistics, transport convoys. One night, our vehicle was almost blown apart. I survived because I noticed wires under the truck. I recognized the same thing under your car. That's why I yelled." Mr. Callahan was stunned. He had never thought the quiet man who cleaned the offices had a history like that. The janitor's past was deeper than anyone had imagined. But there was more. Robert hesitated before speaking again. "Sir, I don't think this was random. Someone wanted to scare you, or worse. And I believe it's someone inside the company." The CEO's jaw tightened. Betrayal inside his own walls? It was unthinkable, but the fear in Robert's eyes was not the kind that came from guessing. It came from experience. "Do you have proof?" the CEO asked. Robert shook his head. "Not yet. But I know danger when I see it. And this danger is close." For the first time in years, the CEO felt powerless. He had built his empire on control, but now control was slipping. He picked up the phone and called security. "I want a full sweep of this building. Every office, every record. And no one leaves until I say so." Panic spread across the company as guards moved from room to room. Computers were checked. Bags were searched. Employees whispered nervously, wondering who could be behind such a plot. Some accused outsiders, competitors trying to destroy the business. But others began to suspect the unthinkable, that the danger was coming from their own colleagues. The CEO and Robert watched the chaos from his office window. The tension was thick. "You realize," the CEO said slowly, "that by shouting last night, you may have put yourself in danger too. Whoever planted that device knows you saw it." Robert nodded. "I know. I've been watched before. I'll be fine." But his voice carried a weight that suggested he wasn't sure. Outside, employees glared in suspicion at one another. Friendships built over years suddenly felt fragile. Trust was broken, and the company had turned into a place of fear. Then came a discovery. Security found strange blueprints printed on a forgotten office printer. The papers showed the CEO's car, marked with notes about placement and timing. The entire building gasped when the documents were shown. It was no longer a rumor. The threat was real, and it had been planned in detail. The CEO clenched his fists as he read the papers. Whoever was behind this wasn't only skilled, they were close enough to know his routine. They knew what time he left, what car he drove, even where he parked. Robert studied the blueprints silently. Then he said something that made the CEO's blood run cold. "These notes, the handwriting. I think I've seen it before. On a memo. In this very building." The CEO turned to him sharply. "Whose handwriting?" Robert didn't answer right away. He closed his eyes, trying to recall. "It belongs to someone high up. Someone trusted." The office grew silent. The CEO realized this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the future of the entire company. An enemy was hidden among his closest circle, someone willing to risk everything to bring him down. He looked at Robert, the janitor who had saved him, and for the first time, he asked for help. "Then we find them together." Robert nodded, but in his eyes there was a shadow of worry. He had walked this path before, of secrets, of betrayal, of danger lurking in the dark. He knew that once you stepped into such a hunt, nothing was ever the same again. And deep down, he feared the truth would be worse than either of them imagined. Outside, the employees waited nervously, unaware that their entire world was about to turn upside down. The storm broke the next evening. Rain hammered the glass walls of the building, lightning flashing across the skyline. Inside, the company was still under lockdown. Employees sat in small groups, whispering, glancing nervously at one another. Every creak of the floorboards, every slam of a door made them jump. The air felt heavy, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Robert, the janitor, walked the halls with quiet steps, his eyes sharper than anyone realized. Once invisible, he now moved like a man on a mission. He studied faces, voices, gestures. He was looking for cracks, the kind of cracks that appear when someone carries a secret too heavy to hide. The CEO sat in his office with security reports spread across his desk. Every file, every camera feed, every employee record had been checked, but the results only deepened the mystery. Nothing obvious had been found. Whoever planned the attack was clever, patient, and knew how to cover tracks. That kind of skill wasn't common. It had to be someone close. The door opened softly. Robert stepped inside, holding a folder. "I think I know who it is," he said quietly. The CEO looked up sharply. "Who?" Robert placed the folder on the desk. Inside were copies of memos and notes collected from the past months. "The handwriting from the blueprints, it matches this. Look." The CEO leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The letters curved the same way, the numbers slanted identically. There was no doubt. It belonged to Marcus Hale, the chief operating officer, the man second only to the CEO himself. For a moment, the CEO couldn't breathe. Marcus had been his ally for years, the man he trusted with the deepest secrets of the business. He had built the company with him, side by side. "No," the CEO whispered. "It can't be." But Robert's steady gaze left no room for denial. "It is," he said. As if summoned by the conversation, Marcus appeared at the door. His suit was damp from the rain, his face calm, but his eyes betrayed something cold. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, his voice smooth. The CEO hesitated, torn between anger and disbelief. Robert moved subtly, placing himself between them, as if expecting danger. "Marcus," the CEO said slowly, "we found something. Blueprints. Notes. In your handwriting." For the first time, Marcus's expression shifted. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, then vanished. He smiled faintly. "Handwriting? That's your evidence. After everything we've built together, you throw accusations at me because of handwriting?" His tone was calm, but there was a sharp edge underneath, like glass about to break. Robert didn't move his eyes from him. "It's more than handwriting. The timing. The access. The knowledge of his routine. Only you could know all of that." Silence filled the room. The storm outside roared louder, thunder shaking the glass. Marcus's smile thinned. "You should have kept cleaning floors, Robert. Men like you don't belong in conversations like this." The CEO felt his chest tighten. The betrayal was real now. It was in Marcus's voice, in his cold defiance. "Why?" the CEO asked, his voice breaking. "Why would you do this?" Marcus's calmness cracked. "Because you forgot who built this empire with you. You take the credit. You take the glory. And you leave the rest of us in your shadow. I was tired of being second." His voice grew harder. "This company should be mine. And it will be." Robert tensed. The CEO's hands trembled. The truth had surfaced, and it was worse than either of them imagined. Marcus wasn't just an enemy, he was a man who had planned betrayal for years. Then Marcus stepped closer, his voice low. "But you know what hurts the most? You wouldn't even be alive if it weren't for him." He pointed at Robert. "Your janitor. Do you realize? He saw something he wasn't supposed to see. And now both of you are in my way. Robert's muscles coiled, ready for anything. The CEO stared at Marcus in horror. This wasn't just business rivalry, this was something darker, something personal. At that moment, a security guard burst into the room. "Sir, we found something in Marcus's office." He held up a small device wrapped in wires. The CEO's heart dropped. It was another explosive, half-assembled, proof beyond denial. Marcus's calm mask finally shattered. His face twisted with fury. He lunged for the guard, but Robert was faster. In one swift motion, the janitor grabbed Marcus's arm and slammed him against the desk. Papers flew everywhere, the storm outside raging as if echoing the violence inside. The CEO shouted, "Restrain him, now." Security guards rushed in, wrestling Marcus to the ground. He fought like a man possessed, screaming that the company would fall without him, that they were all fools. His voice echoed through the halls, sending chills down every spine that heard it. Finally, he was dragged away in handcuffs, his furious cries fading down the corridor. The building exhaled in collective shock. The CEO sank into his chair, exhausted, shaken, but alive. Robert stood quietly, his hands still trembling from the fight. For the first time, their eyes met with something deeper than gratitude. It was recognition. One had built an empire, the other had lived in shadows. But in this moment, both understood that survival had bound them together. Outside, the storm began to ease, but inside the company nothing would ever be the same. The janitor had stopped a plot that could have destroyed everything. Yet in his eyes, there was no triumph. Only the heavy knowledge that when shadows are revealed, more shadows are always waiting.